So we've got shelving on the high end and the low end, high end, low end, right? And we've got peaking. And then there's another kind of thing that this parametric EQ encompasses in it, which is filters, as we talked about before. Most books call it a different type of EQ, but I consider it all part of a parametric EQ. And the filter types are the high pass, low pass, and they affect all frequencies above and below specified frequencies, and they can have different slopes defined by decibels per octave. Here's a good example. So we've got, this would be a high pass because all the frequencies above a specific frequency can pass. This would be a low pass. All the frequencies below a certain frequency can pass. Sort of backwards how they say it, right? So high pass actually filters out low frequencies. Low pass filters out high frequencies. See what I mean about, or two sides of the same coin. And these frequencies where it happens are adjustable. And that's high pass, low pass filter. When you put them all together, what do you get? You get a band pass filter. When they're high pass and a low pass, you can get a band pass, meaning that only a certain band of frequencies can pass through. Now on the EQ that I was showing you before, the one that was red, the screen that was red, it has adjustments for high pass and low pass. Let me just jot back here a minute and show you. Okay, so this guy here is a low pass or a high pass filter, and it happens to be set at 92 hertz. And it's used to remove rumble and low frequency content that you don't like. Sometimes it's used to remove fundamental frequencies in background vocals so they don't sound as competitive with a lead vocal. Here, this is the low pass. It looks to be set, if my eyes don't deceive me, at 18 kilohertz. So it's taking off the super high frequencies, so it's not too bright on the top end. So you can utilize all of these. So you've got parametric bands, peaking, you've got the shelving choice here, and you've got the low pass and high pass filters. And it all happens to be on one EQ. So you get all this in one. It's a nice little consistent package. Okay, so shelving we talked about. This is what it looks like. High or low frequency. Parametric filters have three parameters. They've got gain, boost, or cut in decibels. Frequency, which is the center frequency that it's cutting or boosting. And it's got Q, or bandwidth, of the filter. So let me explain a little bit about what that means. Q is a new term that you probably aren't familiar with, or maybe some people are. This is an example of a parametric EQ. See how twisted that looks? If that was my voice, I wouldn't like it very much. I chose an extreme example to point out what you can do. So this is reduction here. This is addition here. This is very tight Q. When it's really pointed, that means that the Q value is above 1. When it's very wide like this, it means the Q value is below 1. So let's talk about what Q actually is. Q actually stands for quality. Q is defined by, I'll show you a little formula here for you. Q is defined by F1 divided by the bandwidth. So let me do a little calculation for you. For the following curve, you can see that if the high frequency is 1750 hertz, where it's 3 dB down, and 750 on the other side, where it's 3 dB down, you subtract, and you're going to get 1,000 hertz from here to here. And if this happens to be centered at 1,000 hertz, you've got 1 over 1, which ends up being 1 for Q. And what it really means is that it's as wide as it is high. Higher value Q means it looks more like this. Lower value Q, below 1, means it looks more like that. Wider than it is tall, in terms of your peaking. Taller than it is wide is a higher value of Q, higher than 1. So that gives you, oh, I've got a good illustration right here. Your bandwidth and your center frequency, and that looks to be higher than 1, just looking at it, just estimating. higher value of Q than 1. This one here, very high Q, whether it's peaking or it's reducing. This is actually called a notch filter. That's a specialized case of a filter, and it's called a notch filter because if you look at it, it's obvious it's notching out a couple specific frequencies in the spectrum. So it's very targeted. It's very, very targeted at specific frequencies. Like my snare drum has this one overtone that really sounds horrible. I can find it and I can reduce it. Band pass filter we talked about with a combination of a high pass and a low pass filter. You get one band that can pass. The others are diminished around it. That's the basic concept of the tools you have to work with when it comes to EQ. First of all, you've got the graphic, right, which is good for EQing rooms and surroundings. You've got the parametric, which is really good at targeting specific frequencies for mixing and individual sounds. You've got shelving, high and low shelving. You've got high pass and low pass, band pass, notch filter. Notch filter is a specialized case of reducing a frequency at a very high Q. So you can go ahead and create whatever you like with your EQs, whether it's realistic to what happens in nature or not. And you can actually automate things. So if I had a notch filter and I swept it back and forth with automation, just made the center frequency move back and forth, it would be a phaser. It would sound like phasing. Because what you're doing is you're taking different frequencies and you're diminishing them. And actually a phaser is created by well, I'm getting ahead of myself again. So you'll see how all of these tie together, all these effects. And I'm sure that a lot of people understand, because you played around with a lot of plugins, what things sort of sound like. And I can play you examples. But you probably aren't aware of the overall picture of how they're created and how they interwork together. So if I go into a studio that doesn't have a phaser, I can create one. If I go into a studio that doesn't have a de-esser, I can create one. If I can create whatever I need to out of the basic building blocks. Flanger is multiple notches in the spectrum. You can create it with multiple phasers. And it's actually sometimes called a comb filter because it looks like a comb upside down that moves back and forth. And it's more severe sounding than just a single phaser with one notch moving back and forth. But you can create that with an EQ. You can create stuff that's not even natural with an EQ. You can create two notches in different frequency bands and automate them so they move opposite of each other. Something that would never occur in nature, and actually it sounds pretty cool. I've just played around with that. I encourage you to let your imagination go. Okay? Once you get the overall picture of all of these different kinds of effects, then you can go ahead and really combine and loop them and create your block diagram of what kind of effect you want to create. You can create some amazing stuff. Cool sounds. Or you can use it to enhance sounds that actually sound like they occur in nature or not. That's where you've got your building blocks of sound and manipulation. This is just the first stage. We're going to go through all sorts of different stages of how you can manipulate sound. But everybody understands an EQ because everybody has a treble and a bass in their car. And that's why I started with this, because it's the first thing people grab for in a mix. They always go for more high frequency or more bass. And they don't know exactly why they're doing that, other than the fact that people are very familiar with EQ.